Hi guys, so someone recently asked me, how should I listen to jazz? And I thought that was quite an interesting question, so I've made this video in response to try and answer this question. But first, let's answer the question, why should I listen to jazz? So people listen to jazz for many different reasons. For enjoyment, to challenge themselves and push them out of their comfort zone, away from the stuff they're used to listening to. As a learning experience, to steal ideas and incorporate them into your own playing. Or for culture signaling, so that you can show people that you're a real sophisticated cool cat. And to be honest, I think most people listen to jazz for some combination of all of those reasons, and probably others. Now, when I listen to jazz, ultimately, my goal is to figure out what the soloist is doing and thinking as he or she improvises. So I try to follow and understand the solo all the way through. Now, this can be very intellectually satisfying, but there are still two opinions as to how to appreciate art. The first is that greater understanding allows for greater appreciation. The idea that you can appreciate Picasso's beautiful and haunting painting Guernica if you know something about Cubism, about modernism, about abstraction, about symbolism, about the Spanish Civil War, and about fascism. But the second opinion is that greater understanding destroys the magical and mystical aesthetic of art. That the cliche, "no one wants to see how the sausage is made," applies to art. Now, philosophers and poets call this a feeling of the sublime. You lose that sort of awe-inspiring quality of, wow, that was amazing, how did he do that? I have no idea how anyone could ever create something so magical and mystical and beautiful. Now, obviously, I personally am of the first opinion, but if you are of the second, then it's probably worth stopping this video now. So how should you listen to jazz? Well, my first thought when asked this question was, in a quiet, smoky and dimly lit room with a glass of scotch and while tapping your left foot to beats 2 and 4. But more seriously, genres of music, or art in general, have certain features or traits that are prevalent in that genre, right? By definition. That's what makes a collection of songs fall into a particular genre. The genre is defined by similarities between the songs. And knowing these features or similarities or common traits of jazz allows you to better follow what's happening through the performance and thus better appreciate the creativity of the artists and of the song itself. But you really need to listen. This isn't just, casual background music listening. You really need to pay attention. Listen to the song 5 or 6 times and really try and figure out what the soloist is doing and what they're thinking. Okay, so when listening to jazz, here's my personal list of what I listen for and you should listen for. And keep in mind, this is a subjective list and there's no doubt other things you can listen for, but this is a good start. So firstly, at a very high level, listen for that head solo head form. Standard or traditional jazz performances start with the melody, they're followed by a whole bunch of improvisations, and then they finish with the melody again. Also listen for tension and resolution. Right, all of jazz improvisation and all of music and all of art and all of the world and life really is all about tension and resolution. You create tension by playing outside, and then you resolve tension by playing inside. Especially by targeting a guide tone. So really listen to when soloists target and emphasize and sit on a guide tone, so the 3rd or the 7th of a particular chord, because this is done quite a lot in jazz soloing. So really listen to that higher level sort of, where is the tension building up? Where is the dissonance building up? And, oh, it's resolved now here. And then, we're building up tension again, and they've resolved tension again. That's really important and important to pay attention to when you're listening to jazz. Now, at a lower level, you should pay attention to, firstly, patterns. Jazz solos use a lot of patterns. They use a lot of repetition, a lot of sequences, so repetition but from a different note, so a lot of motivic development. The soloist will often create a little phrase and then use that phrase as a motif and then sort of use it again and again throughout his improvisation, but modifying it slightly each time. Cycled patterns, which is just essentially a specific type of sequence, and a lot of call and response. So you could get the soloist or the horn player play a little line, which is the call, and then you can get the rhythm section respond. Or the soloist can do a bit of call and response themselves by sort of playing something in a lower register and then a higher register and so on. So call and response is really, really important in jazz, as are all these patterns. So really listen for melodic patterns in jazz. Similarly, listen for common scales and common licks. So diatonic scales are used a lot, so listen for them, and blues scales are used a lot, so listen for them. And especially listen for blues licks, because depending on who you're listening to, they could be using a lot. Like Oscar Peterson loves blues licks, uses a lot of them. Next, listen for the melody. A soloist will often use fragments of the melody of the song in his or her improvisation. It's a really common technique. And it works well because, again, you're referencing the original material of the song. Also listen for interactions between band members. Again, this call and response between the soloist and the rhythm section. Motivic transfer between soloists. Very often when one soloist finishes with a particular phrase, the next soloist will begin with that particular phrase. Take it as a motif and then carry it on from there in their own solo. Also listen for the balance of tension and resolution between the rhythm section and the soloist. So whenever the soloist starts playing really loud, the rhythm section might play soft. When the soloist plays high, the rhythm section might play low. When the soloist plays really busily and really chromatically and very sort of creating a lot of tension, playing really dissonant, fast notes, the rhythm section might sort of pull back and play really sparse chords or comping to allow more room for the soloist to improvise. And so really listen to that conversation between the band members. Listen to what the soloist does and listen to how the rhythm section responds. That's also a really, really important feature of jazz. And finally, in terms of the harmony, listen for 2-5-1s. 2-5-1s are everywhere. And especially listen for bass movements of a fifth. So the bass is moving down an interval of a perfect fifth each time. That's quite common. But also listen for chromatically descending chords. Right, that type of stuff. That's incredibly common in jazz. So listen for movements of a fifth and chromatic movements. And try and pay attention to the form. Really try and follow the form as you go. Try and find the A sections, the B sections, the C sections if there are any. Listen to when the song, gets to the end and a turnaround is played and it goes back to the beginning for the next soloist or just for another go round for the same soloist. And pay attention to when the rhythm section leaves the chord progression. Because very often in more modern or contemporary jazz, they won't just stick to the plain old chord progression. They'll just leave it and start playing something completely unrelated and different and eventually fall back into the chord progression and melody sort of towards the end of the song. So really pay attention to and try and follow the form. And so that really is a good start. If you can listen to all of those, you're doing really well. But of course, hearing all of these elements pretty confidently will obviously take a bit of practice. Most jazz performances have some combination of these elements, but it's important to know what your level is. If you've never listened to jazz before, don't dive straight into free jazz. You're not going to know what's going on, it's going to sound terrible, you're going to lose interest and you're going to stop. You want to start with something that you're comfortable with and slowly build up to the more adventurous stuff as you gain confidence. So if you're listening to a piece of jazz music and you have no idea what's going on, then take a step back and pick something simpler. And conversely, if you can figure out or understand exactly what a particular soloist on a particular song is doing, then that's too easy for you. Pick something a little bit more dissonant and challenging and adventurous, and sort of go up to the next level. Now, while it's impossible to categorize every single artist into a perfect little pigeonhole, especially because they generally evolve and change over their careers, the table up here in the picture-in-picture will give you just a very rough guide as to where to start and where to move on to. Starting with some pretty smooth, easy to listen to, danceable swing music or cool jazz, all the way through to your post-bop and free jazz and really dissonant, more complex stuff. So I hope that was a sufficient answer for anyone who was interested in the question of how to listen to jazz, and that'll probably keep you busy for a little while. But if you listen to those things, at least again as a start, it'll really help build your jazz vocabulary, and it'll really help you sort of follow what the soloist is doing and be more comfortable with the genre. And if you really want to challenge and you really want to take this sort of to the next level, then start transcribing solos. It's one of the best things you can do. Pick an artist that you like, listen to the solo, and transcribe it. Write it out in sheet music, learn to play it, and then it'll be sort of right there in front of you, before your eyes. You can see exactly what notes they're playing, what they're doing, and you can more or less figure out what they were thinking, what scale they were thinking about or using, what techniques they were using, whether they were using cycled patterns or superimposition or chromatic motions, things like that. And writing it out and playing that yourself is really sort of the next step. Cool, so that's it for me. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you next time. Bye.